the assignment due on Friday. So about storyboarding and making personas, and okay, that's great. Shouldn't it be pretty straightforward? Yeah. Hey Jihad. So today I'm going to talk a bit more about prototyping, and actually this should be lecture 3. I'll change that, and then and this will probably continue to Friday a little bit, and then next week on Adrian's going to start taking over, talking more about actually building technology. So I've got some handouts for you. I've got 2 colour printouts for you two because you're enrolled in the class, and the people that aren't enrolled get the black and white printouts, so kind of second-class citizens. So just first of all, to refresh a little bit what we did last time. So we talked about stakeholders and who are the end users when you're designing for technology, and so I gave the example of a smart kind of shopping cart, and who might be all the people that are the stakeholders, and we talked about, it will be the customers, the shop owners, the checkout operators. So sometimes when you're thinking about that, you've got to think of it in a much broader context of the use. We also talked about how important it was to consider the whole user, and sometimes when people are designing user interfaces, or they just consider about whether the interface is usable, which is basically the physical attributes or the cognitive attributes, but sometimes they don't think about the broader social and cultural context. And that's actually really interesting when you start thinking about technology being applied in very different countries. So, for example, in Africa right now, there's a huge uptake in cell phone usage. And I went to visit Africa a couple of years ago, and so a lot of people using cell phones. One of the problems in Africa is that you don't have any necessarily ready access to electricity. So there's a lot of thriving businesses around there, and all they do is they charge cell phones. So you go to a little village, and the village won't have any power, but there'll be a little shed there with a guy with a diesel generator, and you pay him 20 cents, and he'll charge up your cell phone. And so when you, from a design perspective, when you start thinking about using cell phones, but using them in the cultural context where there's hardly any power, then that might change the way you design the phones, for example. You have longer battery life, or universal connectors, or a hand crank to provide the power, or whatever else. And then around this idea of considering the whole user, then we talked about personas. And so one example I gave was Gunter, the ad guy, and then there was another example of this woman, Ginny. And so this is what you're going to be doing this week, is putting together an imaginary person. And then from the persona, then you can imagine how that person would use technology in context. And so here's this Gunter using this PowerPoint or Predicture for giving his PowerPoint presentations. And there's a little storyboard about how he'd use that. And then the storyboard basically informs a wireframe diagram of how the technology is all used in context. I mean, and what happens when you poke at different buttons on different screens, and we go from there. So that was pretty much the last lecture, on Friday. Do you have any questions about that at all? Go from there?
I had a slight question about the readings.
Sure.
I read the Tiny Fingers ones that seemed quite good.
Right.
In terms of the other paper, the experience design.
Right.
Is that, I didn't quite grasp it. Was it more just sort of designing, but ensuring that you experience it and try and experience?
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that this week actually too. So that's it's an example of a type of prototyping people do. So we'll talk more about that this week.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we're going to talk about now is sketching and prototyping, and this is sketching and prototyping is really the first step in actually building a working system, and then we'll go through the outlining and prototyping, and then Adrian from next week on will start talking about how to build working systems as well. So when you think of a prototype, do you have any, what do you think a prototype is? Does anybody have any thoughts about what a prototype might be?
Sort of your initial concept of what you want it to be before you've gone through to construction or even sourced materials for it.
Yeah, I guess it's quite a broad term, isn't it? What do you think, Natalie?
Anything from sketching to little, I don't know, some people did like little blocks with things on them to kind of demonstrate. So before you actually build anything.
Right. Well, in my mind, it can be anything. Well, I guess I'll show the next slide. From a series of sketches all the way through to something which has some limited functionality. So it's quite a broad definition, and it's really important to be able to build prototypes because they allow people to have something tangible they can start holding or getting an idea around about it. So basically, it becomes an object for effective communication. It means you can test out ideas as well, and you can also start getting feedback right at the beginning. And we've already talked in the previous lectures about how important feedback is to the design process, and you've got this kind of loop going all around as well. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about rapid prototyping, and there's kind of a difference between rapid prototyping and building low fidelity prototypes, and then more high fidelity considered prototyping as well. So rapid prototyping is prototyping you do. It's very fast and inexpensive. It identifies the problems you've got before they're coded up. It helps developers think creatively, and it gets the stakeholders all on the same page. A rapid prototype can take as few as just a couple of minutes to make. And so last week when I gave you the assignment, I think I talked about, I can't remember the exact paragraph in the assignment, but I think I talked about building a tool that will allow people to walk around the city and see photographs of what used to be in place in the city. So what I want you to do now, and I'll give, maybe you guys can come up to the table since we need to do this, is to take about a minute and a half to draw a screen of what that tool might be like. So I'll pass that piece of paper here. So the idea is a piece of software that runs on a phone or a tablet that has a compass and GPS, and it allows people to walk around Christchurch, and depending on the location they have, it will load one or more pictures from that location that have been taken from public source like Flickr or somewhere in the past. So is that enough of a idea, a design brief? So what I want you to do is just take a minute or so to draw a couple of screens that show what the screen would look like to the user. And the drawings can be as bad as you want. It doesn't have to be photorealistic or anything. Does that make sense to you? How I just want you to draw it. So there's a piece of software that lets you walk around Christchurch, and using your GPS and compass location, it will pull up photographs from Flickr or other public sources, and it will show them on the screen based upon your location and where you're looking. So I want you to draw one or two screens of what that would look like. Do you want to do it as well?
Yeah. What do you expect from the reading material?
Oh, right, sure. Listen, we'll just spend like a minute on it, so it doesn't have to be very beautiful or anything. Okay, we'll stop in about 15 seconds, so put your last few squiggles on the screen there. Great. Let's stop now. That's pretty fast, I know, but it's okay. So maybe Natalie, you can hold up your piece of paper and describe what you just drew. So everybody can hold it up so we can see what you've done. Okay, but it's okay. When you describe it, you'll see a bit better.
Very rough, like picture of what it used to look like. So, for instance, if you had your phone up in front of the house, it showed a picture of what, for instance, if it had a lot of damage, and there was a crack, and it would show what it used to be, and then maybe a short description of what it was, any history or that kind of thing, and then maybe a selection of buttons that allow you to go to, I don't know, nearby areas that might have also been damaged or have more information.
Great, that's good, thanks. How about you, James? What's your
More of a screen interface. You look around and it shows.
Make sure Natalie can see as well. Show both.
A little sort of screen with showing like a little thumbnail for the Facebook or the Twitter or the Wikipedia. And if you click on it, and it sort of pops up and fills the screen so that it's more bigger. And then you can left click with little arrows. You can left click left and right to see. Do you want to go to another picture in the area or if there's another?
Okay, so you'll have. So unlike what Natalie's done, you've got several potential data feeds like Flickr and Wikipedia and Facebook or whatever, and based on your location, you can get data from different ones of those and pop them up full screen.
Yeah,
and then go to new ones. Okay, that's great. Good.
A little map in the corner and a compass down the bottom right. So.
Okay. How about for you, Danielle? What did you do?
I drew like a little, here's my little radial map where I am, and my pictures get bigger and smaller depending on which direction I'm facing. Kind of like the what is it, the little toolbar on Mac when you roll over.
Okay.
Bigger and smaller. And then you can pick which ones you want to see, and then look at those comments and give them thumbs up and thumbs down.
Great. That's good. Excellent. And Jiha, what you do a really small picture.
Yes, I have very small picture here. You can show that it's pretty much I did not save the page. So you have the street view, which is pretty much you will see the street, and then you will have on the right or the left, you have the stack of images. Each one is kind of an icon which is based on some priority that will appear. So the closer the bigger, and the closer they have more images in this priority. Then you click on each one, and you will get down the view of the image and detail about these things. But it's kind of like since you have a GPS, you have assumed like you have a direction about the image.
Okay. The whole stack of images. That's great. Good. How about for you, Adrian? Got 2 pictures here. Well done.
Yeah, right. So mine's sort of more along the idea of like a following car GPS. You have the overall map, then you have icons which you can select by touching. Whenever you choose one, you get like a list of pictures or articles or whatever down the side that you can scroll through to sort of see what you'd be interested in, and then you can blow them up as well and sort of see them. So it's sort of the idea is it gives you more of a sort of overview of where you are with information down the side that you can choose.
Great. Okay. Excellent. So you can see that was, what, 2 minutes or so? And it seems like we've got 5 very different ideas, which is great. And you could imagine if we had spent, half an hour or so with a group of people, you probably have 10 or 20 different sketched out concepts. And so that's one of the benefits of rapid prototyping is that you can, with just sketching, you can do very fast and inexpensive design ideas. You kind of have this, if I scroll forward a little bit, you have this process in interface design between elaboration and reduction. So the elaboration is this red area here, sorry, you have this, the red area here is the elaboration where you try and think of as many ideas as you can, but over time you have to whittle those ideas down to the ones that you want to get. So then you have more and more of the green, which is the reduction. So the idea is to quickly generate lots and lots of ideas, and then work over time to try and whittle those ideas down to the final ones that you produce. And you have what's called the design funnel. So with this, you have this initial brainstorming phase where you generate lots and lots of concepts, and then you do some reduction, and over time you get this convergence to the final concept that you want. And the granularity changes over time as well. So here it's very general, very rough, and then you go from a kind of a low fidelity sketch prototype to something which is very high fidelity at the other end here. So we've just done a sketching exercise, and you can see that sketching is really all about design, and it's a tool that's designed to help you express your ideas. You could imagine if you didn't have the sketches here, and you're talking about your ideas. It would be quite hard, for Danielle, for example, to talk about the concept maybe of the pictures being near or large or small, depending on how close they are to you, or your idea of being able to touch on a picture and expand out to other text as well. So sketching is really useful because it helps what they call ideation, to think through and generate ideas. It forces you to visualize how they come together, and also really helps in communicating or in active brainstorming. If we did a whole brainstorming session, you can imagine how that you spend a minute or two sketching, then you'd stop, and you'd share all the ideas, and then maybe you would be inspired by what Adrian's done, and then together you'd think of a new idea that would come out of that process as well. So there's this really tight connection between the creative process, sketching, and generating new knowledge as well. And Bill Buxton, he wrote a really great book about sketching user interfaces, and I'll show you that in a minute. He talked about how sketching is about the activity, not really about the result. It's about the idea of putting designs down on paper. So there's great examples of people using sketching in design previously. So one of them is from Leonardo da Vinci. And a long time ago, I went to Seattle and I saw Leonardo da Vinci Codex, which is one of his notebooks. And his notebooks are just full of sketches and ideas he's got. He wrote text, but he also put lots of sketched ideas down before. You have people like industrial designers who have very polished sketches. So here's a sketch for a wearable computer watch. Then you've also got people that will put different variations of an idea down in a sketch, or looking at design variations. Or you can use sketching also to convey relationships and flow over time. So there's these arrows here, so things have flow. And here's a sketch that conveys storyboard transitions. So of course they're very rough, but and just like what Natalie did, if she had another minute or two, she probably would have put a few more panels, but she was able to, with her sketch, to convey a transition. And same with what Adrian did with his map to the other one as well. So I just want to talk a little bit about some sketching techniques, and then we'll talk about more polished prototyping as well. So you have this trade-off between low fidelity and high fidelity imagery, and ideally you should try and produce an image that has enough fidelity in it to be useful for the task that's needed. So you can see, for example, on the left side here is a very low fidelity image of what might be a dialogue pop-up box for a phone application. But this is really good for conveying your idea, but it's not really good for the actual developer, because the actual developer might want to know, what's the actual size of these, what font do I want to have, what's the distance of the button from the edge. So in that case, a high fidelity prototype is really important, because that actually shows what the final thing's going to look like. So with sketching, one really important technique is just to show the essentials, and I guess all of you did that in the sketches you just made, is that you can just, if you can just draw enough that people can understand your core concept, and that's fine. And this is sometimes called speech sketching, which is basically a very fast sketch you draw in a minute or less, like what you did, and then you can show that, and you can use speech to explain the sketch in more detail. So here's a couple of examples of bare essentials. Another technique is annotations, is where you do a very rough sketch, and then on top of that sketch you annotate and add more details as well. So sometimes people put tracing paper on top of it and add more content, or they might have a video or some other annotation as well. So here's a sketch with some annotations put there over time. Another popular technique is tracing, and so the basic idea is that you can take a photograph or have an element on the screen, and then you can draw over that, and the nice thing about that is it takes almost zero skill. So sometimes people will have, like you can see here, they've got a photograph of a hand. They want to use in their particular communication, they want to be able to have a picture of somebody holding something or interacting in some way with an object, so they need some hands. So they do a whole bunch of hand sketches, and then you can produce some quite rich and nice sketches as a result from that as well. So here's some other examples here. People also use hybrid sketches where they mix a low fidelity and high fidelity elements. So you can see here, this is a hybrid of a photograph of a phone, and then on that photograph is sketched a user interface as well. And so this is really great when you've got a device that has, like if you're building an iPhone application, maybe obviously the physical form factor of the iPhone is probably not going to change, so you can take a high fidelity a photograph of the iPhone, and then on the screen you can sketch out the different user interface elements. And it also has this nice use of contrast, so it means that certain pieces stick out. So here's the basic approach to doing that. And here's some examples of how you can, maybe you're building a travel guide that runs on an iPad, so maybe for one of your sketches you want to be able to have a photograph of a train and then use trace in or sketch in a person using your guide in the train photograph. Or things like this as well, where you can mix in traced pieces of what people are doing. Of course, sketches, there's a problem with sketches is that they basically only show the use of the interface or application at a particular point in time. So then ideally the next thing is to extend sketches into a storyboard, and we talked about storyboards a little bit last week. So storyboards should combine more than one sketch and talk and relate them together over time. So you can see this is a storyboard of somebody going through a purchasing process from Amazon or something like that. And there's lots of examples of stories being used in animation. So here's and that's where they originate from. Here's a sequence from the Big Guy cartoon, and here they've storyboarded some of the key transitions in the animation. But you can also use that to convey information about the device you're using as well. So here's a person who's got some sort of wrist-worn device for GPS or navigating through the city, and so you can see them how they can use that device in different ways. When you're doing storyboarding, you can get a lot of inspiration from filmmaking, and so things like using extreme long shots to establish context, a medium shot to show the users, and then a point of view shot to show what the user sees on the screen, and close-up shots to show key points of the interface. So when you're drawing a storyboard, you should think of it in some ways you're a filmmaker and you're telling a story, and how would a filmmaker frame the story together. One of the most important elements of the storyboards is the transitions, and just like in comic books. So in comic books, they often use different styles, panes, or they focus on the transitions. It's the same as with storyboarding, and people will oftentimes draw state transition diagrams where they connect sketches together using transitions, something like this. So there's some really great resources, and just a couple of books that I've got is these ones here. So Bill Buxton wrote a whole book about sketching user experiences, and then there's actually a workbook that goes with it. So the article I've given you all, this one here, is the first few pages from the workbook, and it talks a little bit about how to build effective storyboards using sketches. But if you're interested in learning how to do sketching and use sketching for effective user interface design, then I can highly recommend these two books as well. So that's sketching. So let's talk a little bit more about prototyping. So there's a difference between doing a sketch and a more high-fidelity prototype. So sketching is really inviting people to participate in the design process. So just like what we did around the table, we all sketched, well, all of you except for me, we all sketched, and then what would happen next normally is a brainstorming process, and you'd share the sketches with each other. Whereas a prototype is more about presenting the final ideas and asking people to attend to your final ideas. So, sketching again suggests concepts, whereas the prototype describes concepts. Sketching is used for exploring, and the prototyping is used more for refining. And you can see a few other differences there. So the main difference is in the intent. With sketching, you're trying to invite people to be part of the design process, and prototyping and more high-fidelity prototypes is more about communicating the final designs or different design options to your client. So you can see there's this kind of trade-off over time with you've got the red arrow here showing the amount of investment in particular design ideas, and then this is over time. So you can see with the goal of sketching is to produce lots of outputs, and it's mostly used in the early stages of design. And the goal of prototyping is to actually build and refine and produce the actual final design. So the prototyping involves a lot more investment in the design, and it involves a lot more effort, whereas sketching involves a lot of low investment and produces a lot more design outcomes. So we've talked a little bit more about before about low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. I'm just going to run through a few examples of these, and I'll give you some case studies to see how it works. So the easiest way of low fidelity prototyping is what we've just done, is just doing sketching interfaces, and it becomes very easy to criticize and get feedback. There's a good example of how you can use prototyping with widgets. So here's an example here with somebody wanted to explore what it would look like to have different pull-down menus. And so what they've done this type is, in cases that they've drawn the screen user interface up, and they use a lot of post-it notes, and the post-it notes show what happens when you touch a menu, and it gives you the menu that pulls down as a result of that. So you can have kind of semi-interactive paper prototypes where you've got some sketches, and then you ask the person to imagine or touch a button on the sketch, and then you put a post-it note or another sketch in place to show what happens when they do that. And this often happens with card-based prototypes, where they can, you build a whole bunch of cards, and then you say, okay, well, when you touch this button here, you're going to see this one here now. Here's a more interesting example of a paper prototype. This is what Apple were doing to get some user feedback. So what Apple, when in the mid-'80s, they were developing the QuickTime VR software. I think most of you probably use QuickTime VR, where you can, you have a picture on the screen, you can click on it with your mouse and drag it, and it actually looks like a 3D model. And what they've done is they've strung together multiple photographs of an object from different viewpoints. Have you all used QuickTime VR? We probably use it on something that's called something else, but if you've ever been to a website where there's like like an Amazon website where you can see the product before you buy it, and you can click on it with the mouse and you can rotate it around and you see all different viewpoints. That's essentially QuickTime VR. But in the mid-'80s, Apple weren't quite sure what was the most natural way for people to have that mapping between mouse input and between the object rotating. So they did some paper prototyping about that. So you can see here is a picture of a Porsche, and then they asked people, when you click on this picture of a Porsche, you can rotate it 45 degrees if you move your mouse in a certain way. And they said, well, how would you move the mouse to get the car to rotate 45 degrees to the right? So how would you go from this picture to this picture? And they gave people, they put tracing paper on the image. They gave people a green pen, and they asked them to draw with the pen how they'd move the mouse. So you can see on the picture here, there's lots of people are clicking on the car itself, and there's lots of motion this way, although some people thought that they would drag diagonally down rather than horizontally. There's another one where they want to move the car up and to the right, so then you can see now the lines moving more up to the right. And then they put these arrows on the corner. So they said, well, maybe if we put arrows on the corner, people will click on the arrow to rotate the car. And do it again, and then again the car up and to the right. And then they said, okay, maybe what we can do is we can put below the picture, we'll put this little compass, and we'll see if people use that. And you can see most people are still clicking on the car instead of that. And again, here as well. In fact, you can see in this case, you want to rotate the car 45 degrees and move it up 20 degrees up to the right, so there's a bit more confusion amongst the users. But you can see that with a very, very little amount of, before Apple even did any coding, they were already gathering information from people from a paper prototype. And by looking at the average of all these lines, they could then code up how they wanted people to work. Another good way, let me just escape from this, is to do video sketching as well. So we've talked about sketching, but you can also put together video sketches to show technology you haven't developed yet. So let me show you a little video of a video sketch. And just pause this. I think I have to push this onto the other screen. There we go. And this is the application in this case is a mind mapping application. So the idea is that, I guess most of you are familiar with mind mapping, where you do a brainstorm dump and you produce concepts and connect them together with lines. So they had thought they might produce a mind mapping application for the iPad. So one of the downsides, as I said, with sketching before, is that you kind of, once you've drawn a sketch, it's hard to change it because it's drawn on paper. But what you can do is you can produce user interface elements, and then use stop motion can show how those elements might interact together in a video. So that's what they have here. Just some audio, so let's play this. Oh, it's just dance music. So this is what it might look like. So you type on the screen there, and then it puts the thing there. You draw a line, and a line appears. You draw a circle with your finger, a little node appears. You can type into the node again, and that gives you a thing there. You can draw another circle. So apparently this is what's on a man's brain at any one time. Beer and TV and different things. And they don't want that one, so the idea is you grab it with your finger and you shake it and the books go away. You can make this one bigger. And they show also that when you drag the bubble, then it goes around as well. So you can see that's very simple, but it becomes quite an effective communication tool. And it's relatively easy to produce video sketches as well. But then when they show that to a potential client, the client has a clear idea now about how these might interact with the system. So once you've built your basic sketch, then sometimes, especially for electronic devices, you might want to build a model prototype. And so this is what Apple were doing in their digital camera prototypes. So they had a bunch of blocks of wood that they would carve into different shapes for cameras. Then they had a bunch of printed out design ideas for different screens and lenses and so forth, and they would glue them onto the blocks of wood. So here's one camera that looks like a very traditional upright camera, but they also had the idea that they might have a camera that was held horizontally with a large screen, so they've got two wooden prototypes of that. You can also combine sketches with those kind of blocks to make the storyboards come to life. So here's a foam core model of a handheld device, and this is supposed to be a device that's used for travel booking. So you can slide into the device a whole sequence of storyboards, screenshots, and then when the person pushes the button, then you can scroll to the screen that it would have on the device. And here's another example of some sort of future watch interface. So you've got a piece of cardboard that's got a hand drawn on it with a watch, and then as I slide this left and right, it will show different user interfaces appearing on the watch there as well. Of course, in software, and particularly websites, it's relatively easy to build screen mock-ups. So, if you're building a user interface for a client on a website, you can use PowerPoint or Photoshop or other image editing tools to quickly build a mock-up that nothing works, but it gives them an idea of look and feel. You can also use physical devices in interactive role plays as well. So here's an idea that IDEO had for recycling. And the idea was that when you put there's a recycling bin, when you put the can in the bin, you get to spin a wheel like a slot machine, and you might win a prize and get a coupon from the, this is for grocery stores, so you might win a coupon that you can then go to you use in the grocery store to get free or discounted grocery shopping. So in order to mock it up, they got a cardboard box with a hole in it, and they built this mock-up, and they built these cardboard wheels here that you could show what would happen when you spun the wheels, and you could actually get it coming out. And here's another example from IDEO. This is they were approached by the French company Accelera to design the cab of the whole train for the high-speed train that they were going to be building. So what they did is they actually built a full-scale mock-up of a couple of seats in the train in their offices. So this is life-size. So people can then test to see whether or not they can put luggage in the overhead bins or not. They can test whether or not they can look out the windows, if there's enough space between the tables and all that kind of stuff. But this is obviously getting to be a much more high-fidelity prototype, and it would cost thousands of dollars to make something like that. So high-fidelity prototypes, they are ones that, like you saw with the train, that use materials you might expect to be in the final prototype that look more like the final system, and you can use a bunch of tools to use that. there can be some dangers though. When you start showing people a high fidelity prototype, they may think they have a full system. They also may react negatively to some of the designs as well. So there's oftentimes compromise in prototyping, and two common types of compromise are is kind of a trade-off between horizontal and vertical prototyping. So horizontal means that you provide a wide range of features and functions, and you basically spec out a lot of the product, but there's very little detail about the functions, and you can't do very much. And the trade-off of that is the vertical prototyping, where you just specify in detail one or two functionality of the system. And of course, the ideal is to have a mixture of both. So from the storyboarding and from the wooden mock-ups, you can go more towards semi-functional prototypes. So, for example, here's a website that's built using basic HTML or maybe PowerPoint, and it is functional enough that it can show the flow through the website, but this is obviously very ugly, and the final site would have a lot more graphics and a lot better on it as well. There's a lot of tools you can use that can be. We talked last week about wireframing. There are tools that you can use to produce a wireframed output, and many of those will then generate websites that will mimic the functionality of your device. So, for example, here's a list of tools here. In a second, I'll just open the Pidoko website. But these, so Pidoko, for example, is a tool that allows you to drag and drop on the screen what an application might look like, and for either websites or for mobile applications, and then you can publish it. When you publish it, it generates a full functional website that you can then click and see different screens with. And the great thing about this is that you can, once you've got that functionality published, and it's not a real iPhone app or Android app, but it just looks like it, you can then share that with potential clients, and they can use the app before it's built as well. So let me just load up and go to the Pidoko so you can see what it looks like. And there's many wireframing and rapid prototyping tools that are like this. So almost there. Okay, so here's Pidoko, and you can get a free trial. The basic idea is that it has a subscription plan, so you pay a few dollars per month to use, and then everything is on the web. So if we go to the tour page here, there's a video. Yeah, we'll watch the video tour. Okay.
Software and mobile apps more quickly and economically. Using Pidoko, anyone can create striking interactive UI prototypes, wireframes, and mockups without any programming required. It's as simple and quick as drawing sketches on paper. But with Pidoko, you can bring them to life instantly to visualize software requirements, gather feedback, and save development costs. And this is how it works. Design screens by dragging and dropping elements from the large UI stencil library directly onto the page. You can upload pictures and graphics, or embed videos. You can also use layers as templates to create impressive prototypes even faster. Then simply link your pages up together to simulate UI navigation. You can simulate and view prototypes in either the classic or the sketched mode. With Pidoko, it's easy to invite others to view your work, provide feedback, or even edit prototypes with you in real time. The project dashboard makes this really convenient for you. Use Pidoko to share ideas, collaborate with your team, and document decisions. Don't waste time lost in translation. Show what you mean. Pidoko allows you to run live remote usability tests with end users online, using screen sharing, mouse trace, and audio that you can replay, edit, and annotate later. This way you can easily gather end user feedback and boost user experience. Pidoko lets you export prototypes as specification documents that you can edit. It takes just one mouse click. You can integrate Pidoko with project management tools, wikis, and other systems using the Pidoko API. What's more, Pidoko works entirely through your web browser, so you can work on Windows, Mac, or Linux from almost anywhere in the world without downloading or installing any software. Be faster, be smarter, be more successful, starting at $9 a month. Sign up for a free 31-day trial today at www.pidoko.com/free.
Okay, so that's Pidoko. So you can see it goes beyond just being a sketching tool. It's a tool that allows you to communicate your designs and even, as I showed there, get early feedback from users as well, and run usability studies over the web. There's other tools as well. So, for example, for mobile development, the App Inventor is actually the URL's changed now. It's now taken over by MIT, but it's a very powerful tool. And this allows you to build Android applications without doing any programming at all. So you basically have two parts on this. The left side here is the layout tool, and you use this to lay out what the screens of the application would look like. And the right-hand side here is a logic programming tool. So, for example, if you wanted to have an application where you click a button and something happens, then you'd draw the button on the screen, and then over here you'd have a button event, and you would it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You'd slide into here what you're going to have happen later on. So maybe you click a button, it plays a sound. Or if you click a button, it shows a picture. And there are tools for iPhone as well. So these are ones that allow you just with an hour or two, you can easily put up a semi-functional prototype that will actually run on your mobile device. Then there's also examples of tethered prototypes, which are more high fidelity. So this again back to when Apple was building the digital camera, there wasn't anything that was digital camera form factor. So what they did is they put an LCD display and they stuck it into a carved out wooden box, and they connected this up to a Mac computer. The Mac computer was doing everything, but it was showing it back onto the display, and they had buttons here that would work as well. So basically you have a dumb device in your hand, but it's semi-functional or functional because it's connected to a real computer in the background. And we've done the same thing here at the HIT Lab. About 5 years ago, we were looking at new types of mobile phone apps, and we wanted to, at the time, programming for mobile phones using Symbian or other languages was very difficult. So we basically put together this handheld device here that had a mobile phone keyboard with an LCD display, a camera on the back of it, and some speakers, a microphone there, and this is all plugged into a PC. And then you would just use Flash or Visual Basic or PowerPoint on the PC, but the output would be displayed on this as well. So you could very rapidly prototype what would happen when you're using the mobile phone. And the final idea is often Wizard of Oz prototyping. Have you heard of that before? Have you heard of it, Natalie? Have you heard of James? Okay, so what's Wizard of Oz prototyping then?
When you have someone who's hiding behind the scenes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's just like the movie Wizard of Oz, where you've got somebody behind the curtain, and so you basically have somebody who's operating the computer that in response to user input. So we've done that in the lab, for example. We were trying to look at how people could use speech and gesture to interact with computers, and it's actually very difficult to build a robust gesture recognition system. So we just put people in a room with a bunch of cameras around them, and we said we had the system, and we asked them to use whatever gestures they wanted to manipulate 3D graphics content. And then we had somebody on another computer out of view would watch on the cameras the gestures they were making, then use the mouse to rotate the graphics around a little bit and give the feedback. And the user didn't know either way, and they just, for all they knew, is that whatever commands they were issuing would be responded in the correct way. So Wizard of Oz techniques is a very powerful way to build what looks like really rich interactive prototypes. So the typical iterations you do is that you use a paper prototype to evaluate the conceptual model or the basic interface ideas you have. Then you build some interactive computer-based prototype that evaluate with the feature placement. You might use a tethered prototype to evaluate the hardware input options. And then you have a real device with most major features, and then you have a real device with all the features and the graphic design implemented. So you can go through a number of iterations. And I think, again, this is taken from the Apple example, that it took them 8 iterations of design before they got to the final point where they had the real device prototyped. So let me give you a couple of examples, and so you can see how it goes and how the process applies. So I'll talk more about the Apple example in a bit more detail. So ideally, initially they had this project inside Apple in the late 80s called Ansel, named after Ansel Adams, the famous photographer. And initially it was a Skunkworks product, and they had just some ideas about digital cameras, but then they wanted to make it real. And the basic idea was how could you combine a computer with a camera to significantly enhance the photography process, using stylus input, using sound, having more storage. So what they did is they produced these physical mock-up prototypes. They also produced a sketching that showed all the system components and how they might relate together. They produced a high-fidelity prototype like this one here, which is tethered. Then they also produced a number of form factors with that prototype. And again, these are all tethered, so all the guts of it was here, and this is just the display elements. And then they narrowed down to a couple of potential mock-ups, and these are 3D printed, so they're much more high fidelity. And that finally was released as the quick take camera that became available in the late 80s. And you can see this camera here is actually quite different from some of the ideas there. There was some final trade-offs where they couldn't have a big viewfinder like they had here because of the price of the LCD displays. They had this one here, and then this led to other digital cameras produced by Minolta, Nikon, and Kodak. And I actually used one of these in about 1995, 1996. So very expensive, about $800 to buy that, and they took I think it was 1 megapixel images, so it was really, really low resolution images, but they were fantastic because you could take pictures and they see them on the computer right away. Here's another example. This is a more interesting product in some ways. This is a concept example. The person wanted to have a physical interface for Windows Instant Messenger, and so they wanted to have a leaf, and then they have these little bugs that would appear or put on the leaf that you could connect with. So this is their sketchbook idea. So here's the leaf, here's a little bug, and the idea was that you could plug the bugs into the leaf and then use that to connect with your friends and establish an instant messenger connection. So that was the very rough sketching detail, and then they made a more detailed sketch of how that actually might work technology-wise. So here's a bug that has a connector in it, and then underneath the leaf you'd have these other connectors, you could plug them in. And here's some more details about the connectors, LED resistors and the different wires you use and so forth. And then here's the prototype, and in this case they used clay, modeling clay to build it up. And then here's the final kind of version here. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is a more complete design case study that goes from it follows the whole cycle through of user needs analysis through to final product. And this is an honours project done by a so first of all, here's the cycle that we talked about before, but just to reiterate in your mind. So when you are doing interface technology design, you should make sure you go through these 3 steps: designing, the prototyping, evaluation, and then you do redesign and you find problems and fix issues. You go through this about 4 or 5 times. So this is somebody's honours project, Sharon Brosnan, for her bachelor's course, and she was wanting to do a project on mobile augmented reality for spatial navigation. So this is a project on an island around the Bunratty Folk Park. So this is an outdoor museum in Ireland where they've basically taken lots of interesting buildings from the last 200 years or 300 years or so in Ireland and brought them all to one outdoor park, and people can walk around and see how people used to live in Ireland in the 17th, 18th century, 19th century. So the Folk Park is an Irish attraction, and it's a 19th century life is reconstructed, and they've all been moved over. There's 30 buildings set in this rural setting here. So she wanted to develop some sort of use augmented reality in some way, and so the idea was you should be able to take the mobile device, point a camera at an exhibit, and you'd recognize the user's location, and you give feedback or provide virtual objects that can be positioned with real objects to convey more information. She also wanted to use this as a navigation aid as well, and most people carry phones, so she thought she built off a smartphone platform and then use some augmented reality technologies like GPS tracking, wireless communication, and so forth. So the first step in doing this was to find out about what people typically did when they went to the park. So she went and followed crowds of tourists around and actually tried to figure out what they did. So she had some she had some human-centered design goals, and she wanted to basically make sure it was the navigation aid was easy to use and clear, it was useful, and it engaged the visitor in some way. So in order to ensure this, you had to understand what people did when they went to the park. So she went out and did a literature study and found use of similar technologies in museum settings. Then she also did, to understand the user over time, she did some observations, some interviews with people. And the park already had a map, and so just like many theme parks, you could go and you could get a paper map and it would show you where things were, and there's also a lot of printed information about where the buildings came from and who lived there and so forth. What she found, though, is that most people didn't use the map. They just kind of wandered around. Most people did have mobile phones, though, and most of them wanted more information. They walked around at their own pace, and they didn't want to spend a lot of time reading information. So they wanted to have information that was straight to the point. There was also a lot of social interactions. People typically visited the park in groups, and they would talk to each other and have a good time. So from that, she then could define some of the functionality of the aid, and once she'd observed users, it made it much easier for her to develop personas and then use scenarios. So this is some of the functionality she decided on. She wanted to have be able to show a map on the phone. She wanted to be able to have a list of all the objects, about having a camera view. In the augmented reality, she wanted to be able to show 3D objects, have a tour guide, 3D placement of buildings. And then she wanted to have sub-options that could provide more information about places around the park, events that are happening, or restaurants there as well. So she produces an initial storyboard. It's pretty hard to read this, and you can see she's not a very good drawer, but it doesn't matter because it's just the ideas. So here's a family arriving at the park for a Halloween festival. When they arrive, there's some events listed up there. You get to a castle, and then when they get to the castle, they've got their mobile device. They pull up the device, and it has a number of sections, and they can point the device at the castle, and the castle marker appears, and then some pop information about the castle appears on overloading the castle. There's also some other activities happening. You can go to you can say you want to get to an activity, and when you get to the castle, it shows some sort of fun fact appearing, and it gives you a quiz, and you can say whether or not you got the quiz question right. There's some 3D annotations that appear that provide more interactive experiences. So here's a beep, and a 3D icon appears. When you touch that, a 3D character appears and starts telling you a story or something. And there's a navigation aid that you can then pick. Using the navigation aid, you can do other activities, like in this case, drawing on the live building of the castle and so forth. So that's the storyboard she put together, and you can see from that you can extract quite a lot of functionality. And then she did the whole interactive design process. So first of all, she wanted to make a low fidelity prototype, and then she wanted to use a high fidelity prototype. So the low fidelity prototype was based around sketching on using post-it notes and PowerPoint. And the high fidelity prototype, she wasn't a programmer, so for the high fidelity prototype, she used WikiTube, which was an existing AR browser application that ran on your mobile phone. So here's some initial sketches she put together for the user interface. You can see she's got used some design tool to produce some quite nice sketch designs. The good thing about this is it's really easy to do. The bad thing is that you can't get any feedback. This was Photoshop, and you can't make changes in Photoshop very quickly. But then she moved over to post-it notes. So here's a series of user interfaces, quite dark pictures, but you can see this is developing the 3D icon a bit more, and she can, over the 3 different prototypes, she moved the home button around, and she made the selection highlight in blue. Then she made a PowerPoint prototype, and with PowerPoint you can run that on your laptop, and you can let people click on buttons on the image, and it will actually support interactivity. So then from this, she can do some small usability testing. So she'll show people a screen and say, okay, now which button would you put here if you wanted to find out where the party was happening in the park? And people say, well, click the events button, or how would you find out where to go for food? Well, obviously through but. And then finally, she used Wikitude. And Wikitude is an AR application that lets you tag points of interest in the real world, and then people can actually walk around it and push the points of interest and stuff like this. And with Wikitude, the advantage of using this is that you can now actually run it on a real device, and people can use user testing in the park, and it has the AR component, which the PowerPoint doesn't have. So then she did user testing, and she got some more feedback from that. And then finally, she wanted to produce her final design concept. She had some ideas that couldn't be implemented in Wikitude. So what she did is for the final design concept and to communicate about it, she made a video. So here's a still image of what the final user interface looked like, and here's a screenshot from the video prototype. So that gives you an example of how you can go all the way from concept through sketching, through several levels of prototyping, to a final video prototype or a final application you can use. So, does anybody have any questions about that? It seems like quite a time-consuming process, but it actually been done quite quickly. So, obviously, if she was to build a real iPhone app or Android app that actually had all this functionality in it, that would take months. But could take a few weeks to go through this whole cycle here and produce a video prototype or some object that produces very clear output, or you can be used for capturing user feedback as well. So that's about all there is for today. As I said, on Friday this week, you've got your assignment due, and then there'll be another assignment due next week. And as part of that assignment, you'll be asked to start using a prototyping tool or some software tool to actually build a working sketch prototype, I guess you could say. So, yeah. Great. Okay. Any questions?
Submitting the assignment, do
Yes.
we just give it to you on paper? Like the other ones we have.
You should be able to submit onto. Do you have your Learn account set up now? Okay, so you can submit it up into Learn. So obviously you've got some sketches and some storyboards you're putting together, and you've got written paragraphs. Any sketching you do, you can scan, and Katie can show you how to scan using our photocopier, and then you can upload the PDF from that, and the Word documents you can upload on Learn as well. So I'll make sure that that's turned on by Friday, and then you can just submit through on Friday for that. I guess with Christoph and Andreas's assignments, you'll be submitting through Learn in most cases as well.
Yep.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks for that.